Elijah Gaines was 39 years old the morning he sat across a mahogany table in a Memphis mediation suite and signed every document his wife's attorney slid in front of him. He signed without argument. He signed without a counteroffer. He signed without the expression of a man who believed he was losing anything at all. His wife, Simone, watched him from the other side of the table with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had planned this moment for a long time. She had the house on Kimbrough Avenue. She had the investment accounts, both of them, the joint brokerage and the retirement fund he had contributed to for 14 years. She had his truck because she wanted it and because she could. Her attorney had structured the settlement to capture every asset the marriage had produced, and Elijah had reviewed the documents twice and signed everything on the line. What she had taken, in total, came to $612,000. What she did not know, what she had never thought to ask about, not once in 12 years, was that $612,000 was not the number that mattered. What Simone Gaines walked out of that room believing she had won was not even close to what she had walked away from. She would find out, and when she did, she would cry in a parking lot in broad daylight, in front of her own attorney, for reasons that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with arithmetic. What happened in that conference room was the beginning of the end of the version of herself she thought she had secured. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee on Elijah's workbench had been there since 5:30 in the morning, and by 7 it was cold, and he drank it anyway. He was a civil engineer by training and a logistics infrastructure consultant by practice, which meant that he spent his professional life designing the invisible systems that move things from one place to another without breaking. Supply corridors, distribution frameworks, the load-bearing logic of how a region fed itself, or shipped itself, or sustained itself through bad weather and worse luck. Most people did not know this kind of work existed. That had always suited him fine. His mother, Claudette Gaines, who had raised him alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Orange Mound after his father left when Elijah was 6, had told him something once when he was studying for his engineering licensure exam and doubting whether any of it would amount to anything real. She had set a bowl of butter beans on the table in front of him and said, "The work that holds things up is always the work nobody sees." You remember that. She had died 3 years ago of a heart condition she had managed quietly for a decade without troubling anyone. He still heard her in the particular silence of early mornings. He was refinishing the workbench itself, solid maple, a piece his grandfather had built in the 1960s, which Elijah had rescued from a storage unit after Claudette passed. The surface had been scarred and stained by 60 years of use. But the frame was sound, the joinery exact, the bones better than anything he could have bought. He had been stripping it back to bare wood for 3 Saturdays running. There was no rushing it. The layers came off when they were ready. He had met Simone at a civic planning forum in downtown Memphis, 11 years before the morning he signed those papers. She had been on the committee for a mixed-use development proposal, and she had asked him a pointed technical question about drainage infrastructure that most people in that room would not have known to ask. He had answered it, and she had nodded and written something down, and afterwards she had found him at the coffee table and asked a follow-up. He had not been used to being followed up with. She was organized, socially fluent, and moved through the world with the specific confidence of a woman who had always known what she wanted. He had admired that. He had built their life around it, willingly and without resentment, in the way a man builds a structure he believes in, solidly, with attention to what lasts. He was not entirely certain when her confidence had curdled into something colder. He suspected it had been gradual, the way erosion always was, imperceptible on any single day, undeniable when you looked at the shape of what remained. In the first years, they had been a genuine partnership, the kind that functions because both people are moving in the same direction and don't need to discuss it. He had built the consulting practice. She had built her planning career. They had bought the house on Kimbrough together and renovated the kitchen over 2 summers and had dinners on the back porch that lasted until the fireflies came out. He had been, in those years, genuinely content. He was honest enough with himself to hold that, clearly, it had been real. And then, it had changed. And both things could be true at once. The change was not one event. It was a direction. She had grown impatient with quiet. She had begun measuring their life against other people's visible versions of success. The associate with the lake house, the developer with the downtown penthouse, and finding their life, his life, insufficient by those metrics. She had started introducing him at functions with a slight pause before his title, as though she was deciding in real time how much to explain. He had noticed this and said nothing, because he understood that what she was measuring him against had nothing to do with him. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter one Thursday evening in January, face up. While she was in the shower, he had not been looking for anything. He had simply walked past and seen a name on the screen in a preview that he recognized. A man named Devereux Cole, who was a real estate developer Simone had introduced him to at a firm function 2 years prior. The preview was not long. It was long enough. He had set the phone face down exactly as she had left it and walked back to the workbench. His hands did not shake. He had stood at the bench for a long time and looked at his grandfather's scarred maple surface and thought about load-bearing capacity, about the precise point at which a structure either holds or gives way. And then he had gone inside and started dinner, because that was a Thursday, and Thursday was his night to cook. One aphorism his grandfather had passed down through Claudette: a man who understands structure is never surprised when something falls. He only wonders what took it so long. He did not confront her. He did not ask questions. He had been an engineer long enough to know that if you wanted accurate data, you did not announce that you were collecting it. He started with what he knew. Devereux Cole was in his phone. They had exchanged numbers at the function, the polite exchange of professionals who might one day need each other. He looked up Cole's firm. He looked up Cole's project history. Then he looked up something else, Simone's calendar, which synced to a shared family account she had never removed him from because, he suspected, she had stopped thinking of him as someone who paid attention. He scrolled back 14 months. The pattern was not hidden so much as it was unconcealed. The way things left in plain sight are often invisible to the people looking for something dramatic. Recurring afternoon appointments listed under client coordination. Overlapping dates with Cole's public-facing project announcements, which Elijah found through basic web searches. 3 weekend entries labeled conference at properties he cross-referenced against Cole's firm's development portfolio in Nashville and Huntsville. He built a timeline on a legal pad. He used pencil, the way he always drafted preliminary schematics, provisional, erasable, honest about its own uncertainty. By the end of that first evening, the timeline covered 2 pages and was no longer uncertain. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined every decision he had ever made. He photographed the calendar entries with his personal phone, a device registered under a consulting LLC he had incorporated 6 years ago that Simone had never asked about. He noted dates, cross-referenced entries, built the framework of a documented record the way he built everything else, from the foundation up, with nothing assumed and everything verified. Then he looked at the finances. The joint accounts told one story. The brokerage, the savings, the retirement fund, These were the accounts Simone knew about, because they were the ones she managed, the ones she had organized with her characteristic precision into a picture that looked, from the outside, like the comfortable financial life of a moderately successful professional household. That picture was accurate as far as it went. It did not go very far. Over the previous 6 years, through the Consulting LLC and a second holding entity that Elijah had established on the advice of his accountant after a significant infrastructure contract in year 3, he had been building something else entirely, quietly, methodically, in the way that men who understand invisible systems tend to build things. The contracts had grown. The portfolio had compounded. He had reinvested carefully and lived on less than he earned, and told no one, including Simone, because the business was his, had always been his, and he had understood from the beginning that what you did not volunteer was not something that could be taken. The combined value of the two business entities, last appraised 8 months ago, was $4,300,000. It was not in her name. It had never been in her name. The prenuptial agreement they had signed, which she had proposed, which her own attorney had drafted, which had been designed primarily to protect a modest inheritance she had received from her father, had included standard language protecting premarital and separately held business assets. The Consulting LLC had been incorporated 5 years before they married. He sat with this for a long moment. The coffee on the bench had gone cold again. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. "Raymond," he said, when the man answered. "I need you to pull everything we've got on the LLC structure and the holding company, and I need you to find me the best family law attorney in Memphis who isn't already retained by someone my wife knows." He paused. "I'll explain when I get there." He opened a new document on his laptop. He named it Next Steps. Raymond Alcott had been Elijah's business attorney for 7 years and had the desk of a man who filed things immediately and the face of a man who had heard everything twice. He sat across from Elijah the following Tuesday and listened without interrupting, and then he put on his reading glasses and reviewed the documents Elijah had brought and said, "She doesn't know about any of this." It was not a question. "No," Elijah said. Raymond took off the glasses. "And the prenuptial. Her attorney drafted it. Her attorney filed it." Raymond was quiet for a moment, with the particular quiet of a man running numbers in his head. The LLC incorporation date is 5 years prior to the marriage. Yes. And the holding company was established in year 7 of the marriage as a separately capitalized entity funded exclusively through the LLC. Correct. Raymond set the glasses on the desk. Then the marital estate, as defined by the prenuptial agreement her own attorney wrote, does not include either entity or their assets. He picked up his pen. What she'll be entitled to under that agreement is the jointly titled property, the joint accounts, and any assets registered in both names, which she's welcome to, Elijah said. Raymond looked at him steadily. "You understand that what she thinks she's taking and what she's actually taking are going to look like 2 very different numbers when this resolves." "I understand that completely," Elijah said. Raymond almost smiled. He did not quite. "I'll refer you to Phyllis Brewer for the family side. She's thorough. She does not lose on paperwork. Real power operated in quiet rooms." Elijah had always known that. He had just never needed to demonstrate it before. He met with Phyllis Brewer the following Thursday in her office on Madison Avenue, a space with good light and no clutter, and the quiet authority of someone who had been doing exacting work for a long time without needing to advertise it. She reviewed the prenuptial agreement in front of him and did not change her expression once. "This is her attorney's language," she said, when she finished. Yes, her attorney protected her inheritance and inadvertently created a clean wall around everything you had built separately. She set it down. "I want you to understand that this is not a loophole. This is the agreement working exactly as written." "I know," he said. She looked at him with the directness of a woman who had long ago stopped softening professional assessments. "My advice is to let her lead. Let her file. Let her make her demands. Don't counteroffer, don't negotiate, don't add anything to the pile. When she asks for what's on the surface, you sign it." She paused to let that settle. She'll believe she has won. Her attorney will believe the same. The moment that settlement is executed, the business entities are permanently beyond her reach, not because you hid them, but because she never asked about them. And the agreement she signed a decade ago says they were never hers to begin with. Elijah nodded slowly. He thought about his grandfather's workbench, about stripping back all the accumulated layers until what remained was only what had always been sound. "Sign everything she wants," Phyllis said. "She'll find out what she didn't take when the ink is dry." He spent 2 weeks in a state of deliberate ordinariness. He came home. He cooked. He asked about her day and listened to the answer. He did not ask follow-up questions she would find unusual. He did not alter the rhythm of anything. On a Tuesday, he fixed the loose hinge on the back gate that had been sticking since October, because fixing it was the appropriate thing to do, and because a man who stopped maintaining his house suddenly would be a man who had changed. He had not changed. He was simply operating on a longer timeline than she knew about. On a Saturday morning, he refinished the final section of the workbench and applied the first coat of tung oil while she sat on the back porch with her phone. And he could hear the faint, low register of a voice that was not hers through the screen door, and he noted it with the same attention he gave to all data and kept working. The oil went on in long, even strokes. The grain came up dark and clear and specific. She came to the workshop door at one point and leaned in the frame and looked at the bench. "That actually looks good," she said, with the mild surprise of someone who had forgotten that he knew how to do things. "It should," he said. "It's good wood." She went back inside. He heard the screen door close. He kept working. Some things, when you stripped them back to their true nature, were more valuable than they had appeared. Simone filed for divorce on a Friday in late February. Her attorney, a man named Garrett Price, who had a reputation for aggressive asset extraction in high net worth separations, submitted an initial demand that accounted for the house, both investment accounts, the retirement fund, and the truck. He had clearly reviewed the visible marital estate with precision. He had reviewed exactly what Simone had shown him. Elijah forwarded the filing to Phyllis. He called her that afternoon. "They've listed what we expected," she said. "Yes," he said. "Are you prepared to sign it?" "Completely," he said. He was. The mediation took place on a Thursday morning in April, in a suite on the 14th floor of a building on 2nd Avenue that had views of the river and carpet the color of old money. Simone arrived with Garrett Price. Elijah arrived with Phyllis Brewer and Raymond Alcott, and a demeanor so settled that Simone, he noticed, looked at him twice when he walked in. The involuntary recalibration of someone who had been prepared for a different version of this scene. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for negotiation. She had built a case designed to dismantle the defenses of a man who would argue. He did not argue. Phyllis laid Elijah's response documents on the table. They had agreed to every term in the demand. The house, the investment accounts, $438,000 combined. The retirement fund, $161,000. The truck, $612,000 total, every number Price had put on paper, accepted. Price reviewed the response with the restrained surprise of a man trying not to look surprised. He conferred with Simone in low voices. She looked at Elijah once, measuring, and then looked away. Elijah signed where Phyllis indicated. He signed calmly, completely, and in the correct sequence. He did not pause. He did not sigh. He did not perform the grief of a man losing something. Because he was not losing something. When the last page was executed, and Phyllis collected her copy, and Price collected his, there was a brief administrative pause, the particular quiet that follows the completion of a formal process. Simone was gathering her things with the efficient composure of a woman concluding a business meeting she had won. It was Raymond who spoke. He addressed Garrett Price, professionally, in the manner of one attorney providing a courtesy disclosure to another. He placed a single document on the table, a business registration printout, the kind available through any state commerce office. As a matter of record, Raymond said, I want to note for the file that the settlement today addresses the marital estate as defined under the prenuptial agreement executed in 2013. Mr. Gaines' business holdings, specifically the Consulting LLC incorporated in 2008 and the Infrastructure Holding Company established in 2015, are separately held assets under that agreement and are not addressed by today's settlement. He said it the way engineers stated load calculations. Without drama, without apology, as a fact about how the structure had always been built. Price went still. Simone stopped gathering her things. Raymond continued, mildly. The current combined valuation of those entities, as of the most recent independent appraisal conducted in August of last year, is $4,300,000. He paused. We simply wanted that reflected in the record, for completeness. The room was quiet, in the specific way rooms go quiet when something large and irreversible has just been understood. Simone looked at Elijah. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who had signed everything she asked for. You had an LLC, she said. Her voice was flat in a way that meant it was working hard to be flat. I've had it for 16 years, he said. Price was already leaning toward her, speaking in the quiet, urgent cadence of an attorney recalibrating in real time. Elijah heard the words prenuptial language, and separately capitalized and at the time of execution, and watched them land on Simone the way all true things land, not suddenly, but in accumulating weight, each word adding to the last until the total was undeniable. She had signed the prenuptial agreement. She had let her attorney write it. She had protected her inheritance, and in doing so had drawn a legal wall around everything Elijah had quietly, patiently, methodically built before she ever walked into a planning forum and asked him a pointed question about drainage infrastructure. She had designed the cage. She just had not known who she was putting inside it. Elijah stood. He straightened his jacket, the same dark blue one he wore to any professional occasion requiring a jacket. He picked up his copy of the settlement. He looked at Simone one final time, and his voice when he spoke was entirely without heat. You built a plan around what you could see, he said. I've spent my whole career building things that hold up underground, where nobody looks. I hope the settlement serves you well, Simone. I genuinely do. He picked up his briefcase. He walked out. Behind him, in the hallway outside the suite, he heard the door open again almost immediately and heard Price's voice, urgent and low. And then he heard Simone. And what he heard was not rage and was not accusation. It was the sound of a woman beginning to understand the full size of what she had not taken. He did not stop walking. 16 months passed, steady and unhurried, like water finding its level. Elijah bought a house in Germantown, a 1950s ranch on a corner lot with mature trees and a detached garage he converted into a proper workshop over the course of 3 weekends in September. He installed a workbench himself, new lumber this time, though he brought his grandfather's restored maple piece to anchor the wall, and hung his tools in the order he preferred, and let the space be exactly what he needed it to be: quiet, organized, and entirely his. The consulting firm had taken on 2 new infrastructure contracts that fall: a regional distribution corridor in western Tennessee and a municipal logistics engagement in northern Mississippi. Combined, they represented the largest annual revenue the LLC had generated since its founding. He had brought on a junior partner, a young engineer named Deshawn, who reminded him of himself at 26 in the specific way that made him want to pass something useful along rather than keep it to himself. He had established the Claudette Gaines Foundation in his mother's name, a small, targeted organization that provided engineering scholarship support for young men from Orange Mound and the surrounding neighborhoods. The first 2 recipients had enrolled in the fall semester. He had attended the small ceremony and stood in the back and not made a speech. He had met a woman named Iris at a neighborhood planning meeting in October, which he supposed was fitting. She was a city planner with a dry sense of humor and a habit of asking follow-up questions that made him think she was actually listening, which in his experience was rarer than it should have been. She did not perform for him. She did not need to. By the new year, she had a key to the workshop, and on Sunday mornings she brought 2 coffees and sat on the workbench stool and read while he worked, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind. He heard about Simone through a mutual contact in the spring, not gossip, just information, offered in passing and received without appetite. She had sold the house on Kimbrough Avenue. The real estate developer she had left him for had relocated his firm to another city under circumstances the contact described carefully, which meant the circumstances were not good. Simone was working independently now, doing event coordination, which was a professional step removed from the planning career she had built. Her mother, a dignified woman named Frances, who had always been kind to Elijah at the holidays, had reportedly not spoken to her daughter in some months. He did not dwell on it. He noted it the same way he noted weather, as real, as outside him, as not his to carry. On a Sunday morning in late April, Elijah stood in the garage workshop with his first cup of coffee cradled in both hands and looked out the side door at the yard he had been working on since February. He had laid a stone path along the east fence himself, level and even, with a small sitting area at the end where 2 chairs and a low table now waited in the early morning light. He had planted a fig tree at the corner of the fence line in March. It was establishing itself slowly, putting down roots, doing the invisible underground work that preceded everything visible. The morning came in through the open door with the particular quality of a southern spring, warm already, and full of possibility, and patient with itself. He thought about Phyllis Brewer's advice, delivered in that clean office on Madison Avenue, and how it had been correct in every particular. He thought about his mother at the kitchen table with her butter beans, telling him what she knew about invisible work and the men who did it. He thought about the prenuptial agreement Simone's own attorney had written, and the clean wall it had drawn around everything he had ever built before she arrived, and the fact that she had never once, in 12 years, asked what was on the other side. He took a long sip of coffee. Some men spent their lives proving their worth to people who had already decided not to see it. He had learned, slowly and at some cost, that this was not a structural problem with the men. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. And the fig tree was going to be something, given time. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.